Good afternoon. Just wanted to let everyone know we are waiting to achieve quorum. We need 6 more members to do that. So as soon as we have quorum, we will start the meeting.
How are you? A little warm?
Okay, folks, just to let you know, we're not quite at quorum yet, so we can't get started. This is a 4:30 meeting, but we can't get started until we get at least 16 here. Okay, I think quorum just walked in the door. So I think we've got enough to get started. Obviously, we're not going to be able to leave. If anybody has to leave, we're going to have to stop the meeting unless we get some more counselors here and to be able to substitute. So I'll call the meeting to order, and I'll ask members to please sign in on your desks. And that I'll ask at this time if there's any changes in the order of items on the agenda. And seeing none, I'll ask for a mover and seconder for the agenda. Moved by Councillor Rigby, seconded by Councillor Joyner. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. Thank you. I'll ask at this time, are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please let that be noted. Okay, moving on to the reason we're here. This is a special meeting of council. It's being held in accordance with Section 26 of the Planning Act. The purpose of this meeting is to receive comments and answer questions from the public and members of council regarding the 5-year review of the Regional Policy Plan. Any person present who wishes to make a presentation on this matter will be given an opportunity. Written submissions may be placed on a public agenda and become part of the public record. Your personal information will be collected and maintained for the purposes of creating a record and may be available to the general public pursuant to the Municipal Act, the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Your Privacy Act, and other relevant acts. Should you have any questions related to the privacy policy, please contact the Regional Clerk's Office and they'll let you know. Members of the public and applicants are welcomed to provide their input and concerns to members of council and to the regional staff, either orally today or in writing to the Regional Clerk. With that said, we have a presentation today. So I'll ask if Mr. David Hayworth is in the audience, and if you will please come to the podium. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon to the Chair, council members, senior staff, and the public that's come to attend the meeting.
Mr. Hayworth, maybe for the audience's benefit, you could state your position and the reason you're here.
Right. I'm Dave Hayworth, and I'm the official plan policy consultant, and I'm working on the new official plan for council.
Thank you.
So tonight we're having a special meeting of council, as the chair indicated, under the Act, to just hear what people have to say about us doing a new official plan, some of the concerns or issues that they may have, and it's the first component step of a new official plan creation under the Act. And we're doing this under Section 26 of the Act. We're receiving comments on policy issues, topics, and we've advertised this meeting in all the local newspapers once per week for 2 weeks as required under the Act, as well as on social media. We're doing a significant amount of other consultation, and we've already done a significant amount of consultation that's still relevant. There was a significant amount of input gathered through Imagine Niagara, which occurred through social media. We got a lot of input on growing the economy, employment, natural environment, rural and agriculture, infrastructure, transportation, managing growth and engagement. And all of that is still fairly relevant, we believe, and we'll be considering that input through the process. And council actually initiated this process back in 2016 by providing funding for the 5-year review of the official plan and creation of a new official plan. So what has happened since? I was hired to work on the new official plan. We've developed a high-level framework and identification of key priority background studies that I'll speak to. We've developed the frameworks in consultation with area planners for growth management, natural environment, agriculture, aggregates, and climate change. And Regional Planning and Economic Development Committee and Council has approved those frameworks. And we've been going around providing presentations to local councils, and we've been to 7 of the local councils so far, with the next 5 scheduled over the summertime. And we've started Indigenous consultation and outreach to the Indigenous communities, and we are scheduling sessions for the summer. The preliminary high-level objectives that we want to achieve is to promote and achieve great development outcomes that contribute to complete community solutions and a quality urban experience, facilitate opportunities for economic growth, protect regional, natural, and agricultural resources, and adequately respond to the challenges of climate change, provide clear policy direction where necessary and discretion where appropriate, address provincial requirements, regional mandate matters, and provide guidance to the local area municipalities. And the regional mandate is something we'll consider in the development of all our background studies that will inform the official plan. So what Council has probably heard in the past about a municipal comprehensive review that was basically growth management related. But now with the new provincial planning documents, the municipal comprehensive review is basically the new official plan. And it incorporates growth management as well as other factors like natural heritage, agriculture. So we're initiating key priority background studies that are going to inform the creation of draft policies that will be compiled into the creation of the new official plan. So in terms, I mentioned this is one step, one initial step in public consultation and in consultation in general that we'll be doing over the course of the next several years to create the new official plan. In terms, we'll be getting input through consultation at key steps of the formulation and completion of the background studies. Once background is compiled, we'll be getting input. When we develop options at the background studies, we'll be getting input. When we develop recommendations, we'll be getting input, and then we'll be getting input at the policy stage. Under growth management, we have the main components are the land budget, which is the land needs assessment, urban structure, employment lands, and housing strategy. And in terms of the land needs assessment, we want to determine the amount of urban land needed for residential and employment purposes to 2041, identify any excess lands that will need to be designated for development post 2041, look at alternative greenfield density targets to the required 80 people and jobs per hectare that can be requested to the province. An opportunity is available to rationalize urban boundaries regionally to ensure that sufficient lands are in the proper location to accommodate growth. And urban area boundary expansions can take place in that respect if there is an excess lands, provided there is the de-designation of lands. In terms of employment land strategy, we want to ensure sufficient and marketable supply for traditional industrial employment. We want to identify important regional employment areas, and those, once identified, are areas that have to be protected in the long term, and to convert them would require a municipal comprehensive review and official plan amendment at the regional level. The region is currently working with the local municipalities, specifically area planners at this stage, and this project will be informed by the region's annual employment inventory. Urban structure. The urban structure is a significant component for the region to achieve an eventual 60% intensification rate under the growth plan. There's a hierarchy of settlement areas, but the main important part is within settlement areas, we want to identify intensification areas to direct growth, areas best served by a combination of transportation, transit, public works, community infrastructure, and services, and assign population and density accordingly. And in terms of a draft urban structure, we're looking at downtown St. Catharines Urban Growth Center, downtown Niagara Falls, and downtown Welland emerging urban centers, the GO transit station areas, which are the subject of the secondary plans. Other regional growth areas, an example would be the district plan work we're undertaking, the Brock District Plan and the Glendale District Plan. Regional corridors, key regional corridors that link urban areas, And then municipalities can identify local centers and local corridors in their official plans as well. Housing strategy, we want to promote an appropriate range and mix of housing forms, promote choice, aging in place opportunities, and affordability, set affordable ownership and rental housing targets, identify tools to support affordable housing, align with the Housing and Homelessness Action Plan, and support complete communities. And all of those are key requirements under the growth plan. So that completes what we're looking at from a framework perspective for the growth management program. For the rural and natural systems management program, we have agriculture, natural environment, aggregate resources, and climate change. For the agricultural framework, we want to recognize agriculture as a primary driver of the regional economy, protect the unique lands, update specific policies such as agriculture-related and on-farm diversified uses. And as I mentioned, we developed these frameworks with a lot of input from local area planners. And some of that input centered around the viability of certain agricultural lands to consider, refinement to the province's agricultural systems mapping, how wineries are addressed in the escarpment plan and the province's permitted use guidelines, the importance of agricultural impact assessments, importance of compatibility between the regional natural heritage system and agricultural system, and concerns about the use of greenhouses for cannabis. So these are all inputs that will be factored into the background study. For natural environment and water systems planning, this is a significant component of the regional official plan to meet provincial policy direction. It is recognized that accurate mapping and appropriate methods to interpret and update mapping is critical and is planned to be discussed early in the process with the discussion document. We want to establish criteria and identify features for provincial compliance, example woodlands, develop watershed planning policy framework. That has also been identified through our discussions with area planners as a very important topic to discuss early on in the process. And specific topics for consideration that have been brought out in discussions with area planners, offsetting shorelines, watercourse mapping, and this just high-level comments that we'll have to discuss through the background studies in terms of just looking at it. Education is going to be a priority component of the engagement process. There's a lot to educate people on in terms of natural heritage policies and criteria. Aggregate resources, the aggregate resources background work was started under Imagine Niagara, and a lot of work was done, and the province then updated its provincial planning documents, so it was put on hold. After those documents were updated, we went back and updated the background study work, which was an addendum that's already been before the Planning Committee and Council, which has been approved. So at this point, we have the background work to start informing the drafting of policies, and that's what we're ready to do. In terms of climate change, there's opportunities for climate change adaptation and mitigation. And this slide basically shows all the components that can influence climate change and have influence. And all of those components are components of the growth plan and will be key components of our official plan as well. So there'll be all our sections of the official plan in one way or another will address climate change directly or indirectly, and then likely we'll have a separate section pulling it together in the official plan. In terms of engagement process considerations, we want to engage engagement of Indigenous peoples early, and I mentioned we've started that process. We want to carry forward essential information and direction, a clear understanding that one policy decision impacts another, opportunities for council members to feel involved, consideration and identification of the regional mandate, as I mentioned, broad-based and personal consultation, and provide strategic facilitation where necessary. Moving forward, obviously we're going to comply with Planning Act requirements for public meetings and open houses. We want to provide broad consultation in the development of background studies and official plan policy sections. We're going to keep local councils updated as we move through the process. We're going to use a lot of the input we received through this process as well as what we did receive through Imagine Niagara. And we're going to complete the OP in sections for endorsement and then consolidate them together for formal adoption and formal public meeting for council to consider in terms of adopting the regional official plan. We want to complete this work by 2021. So we have a motion for council to consider for tonight that the council hereby authorizes the preparation of a comprehensive new official plan in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act. And that's the presentation for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hayworth, for your presentation. The speakers list is open, and I see there's a couple of speakers with questions. Councillor Joyner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hayworth, for your presentation. I have one quick question. Could you please go back to the agriculture slide? And I'm sorry, I can't tell you which slide it is because I didn't see any numbers on it. Okay, go back to one more there. Okay, you're right. Go flip back to the one you were just at. So my question is so when we look down here, all the agriculture framework, and we look at your top line is recognize agriculture as a primary driver of the regional economy. My question is, where do we talk about the creation of agricultural industrial parks? Will that be included somewhere in one of your bullets here?
I would say that is something that we can look at in terms of what we want to try and strengthen the agricultural economy as much as we can under what the provincial framework would allow for. So that is something we can look into in terms of how it fits with the provincial framework.
Okay, so
as it stands now.
So can I make that as under staff direction that we include agricultural industrial parks too as well to be looked at? And the framework around that?
Well, they would have to be, the terminology of industrial park is something that I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. And they would also have to be, it would also have to entail uses that are permitted under the Greenbelt Plan and Growth Plan. Okay. And it would be limited to that.
Okay, thank you for that, sir. Mr. Chair, may I ask Mr. Mustachi or Mr. Giles that question, please?
I'll ask them. Mr. Mustachi, Giles?
Sure, through the chair, I think we can consider that in two areas. Under provincial policy, we also have to look at agricultural diversified uses, and that's uses that are allowed in association with agriculture. So that's one part of it. I think the other area we would look under that is under employment land strategy, and look at how that would impact our supply of future employment land, and that maybe as a specific category that could be addressed.
Okay, thank you for that. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Giles. Mr. Giles, am I using the right terminology, industrial park in an agricultural area, or is there another name for it?
Generally, industrial parks are now referred to as employment lands. It's a general term that's applied to them. So it would be employment lands, but we would have to look at employment lands specifically servicing maybe agricultural areas.
Okay, okay.
And look at it in that context, but we would work that out.
I know that we're looking at, through you, Mr. Chair.
One sec.
Okay.
Mr. Mustachi?
Yeah, I could supplement that as well, Mr. Chair. As part of the employment strategy that we're looking at, there's various categories of employment, as we know. So there's prime employment, which is primarily, along highway corridors, logistic oriented. There's community employment, and certainly we'll look at agricultural employment as one of the areas of focus and how to accommodate both on-farm diversified as well as sort of consolidated employment functions that occur in rural areas. So that's definitely something that's part of the employment strategy. I can commit to that.
Thank you both, Mr. Giles, Mr. Mustachi. Through you, Mr. Chair. I know that our plan at the Township of West Lincoln is looking at very seriously at doing something, an employment park in the agricultural area. One of the reasons why we're looking for something like this is because these would be prime areas where a cannabis operation could go. We have the cannabis operation that can go inside our industrial park, inside of our urban area of Smithville, but we also would like an employment park area outside in the agricultural where a cannabis operation could go. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Volpatti?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation, David. Could you just tell us when the last time was that we had a comprehensive review of our official plan.
In a sense, just a consultation review was started under Imagine Niagara. I can't remember the exact date of that.
But when is the date of our actual official plan?
Early 70s, and there's been amendments, and when that was approved by the board exactly, I don't know. But the platform, part of the reason why we're doing a new official plan is the date of the platform. So the platform was structured mainly on agricultural lands, preserving agricultural lands, and urban boundary lines. And since that time, the regional mandate has increased in planning and what it's responsible for, and now it's responsible for a significant amount. It has provincial review functions, and it has growth management functions. So we want to create a new official plan that is more contemporary and reflects all the new responsibilities of the region.
Right. So I think that since the 70s, there have been many changes in the environment and provincial regulations. How many amendments have we had, if you know, in total?
I don't know off the top of my head, numerous amendments, some site-specific, but others related to growth management.
So probably in the hundreds?
I wouldn't say that, but there's been quite a few.
There's been quite a few. So timely that we're addressing this at this point. And can you tell me what the status is of the official plans in the lower tier municipalities? Are they all going to be redoing theirs, or how are they going to be integrated with ours?
Yes. Given the dates of approval of most of the official plans, they're due to be updated anyway. But after our official plan is approved by the province, the local municipalities will have to bring their plans into conformity. I think technically they have a year to do that, although
A year after 2021?
Yeah, right, but I don't know that that is something, how rigidly that would be enforced. But what we want to do to help accommodate that is create some templates or frameworks that the local municipalities can use to help them in terms of bringing it into conformity. So they can apply those frameworks and they can add their local nuances to it, but it will help to speed things along.
Okay. I think David knows this. In Niagara Falls, there's some concern about which plan will prevail, the region's plan or the Niagara Falls plan. And I'm sure that's not restricted only to Niagara Falls. I mean, that's the one I know of. Yeah. How do you intend to proceed so that we don't run into those difficulties?
Well, planning, in a sense, is a hierarchy. There's an umbrella of hierarchy. There's provincial plans that we have to comply to, and when we do that, their local plans have to comply with our plans. One of the things I mentioned in the presentation is we want to provide guidance to the local municipalities, and we only want to be prescriptive when it's a strict compliance issue. And the rest of the time, we want to provide a good guidance to the local municipalities and let them be able to do their local planning. And that's a fine line and balancing, and that'll have to be worked out through the creation of policy and how you word the policy, et cetera, and back and forth with area municipal planners, et cetera.
So through you, Chair, there will be a consultation process all the way through.
Right.
So there'll be no surprises at the end, and there'll be negotiation, I'm sure.
I do not want there to be surprises.
If I could just ask Mr. Mustache to comment on that.
Yes, this is a great opportunity to comment on that, Chair Caslin. In terms of like our philosophical approach with the new OP, it's not to be so prescriptive in terms of the process. We don't want to create a policy construct that is difficult for local municipalities to administer. What we want to do is focus on outcomes. So the guidance is to provide local municipalities with expected outcomes, and how they achieve those outcomes is really their business in terms of reflecting local context, reflecting local processes, reflecting local values. So really it's setting out the guidelines, the guidance, the expected outcomes, and then leaving it up to the municipalities to invent the process to achieve those outcomes.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And my last question, we have a new provincial regime, and I expect I'm assuming that there's going to be new regulations coming forward, and that will happen with the new government, I think. My comment really is that it's probably a very good time for us to be starting on this process because we'll be able to assimilate all of that into our own new plan. Do you have a comment on that, David? Or it's just a comment that I'm making.
You're correct with the election. Obviously, at this point in time, we have to go with the policies that's in place at the time, right now. And you'll probably be hearing, potentially, I know there's been some submissions about properties that are in the Greenbelt plan, et cetera, that there was some requests to remove those lands and wasn't supported by the province. So, we will carry on forward with the policies that we have to take into consideration under the Planning Act as it stands now. But, obviously there'll be some discussions about some of the areas that were of a concern before to see if there's any potential change in interpretation or anything of that nature.
Right. Good, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to go to the climate change slide, if you could. It speaks about opportunities for climate change adaptation and mitigation. And then it speaks about the region's role relative to greenhouse gas targets. There's a little section there at the bottom that speaks to energy. And I just wanted to ask that the planning consider what the province moved to wind energy as an alternative to the coal burning energy, and that would reduce greenhouse gases. But in the process, they didn't really consider the impact on a community when the industrial size wind turbines go up, and then almost, I think it wasn't even considered the impact of the above ground transmission lines and the underground transmission lines. So when we're developing this OP, whether there's any more wind farms or not, we need to consider the impacts on the municipalities when these things go in. And I think we should address I think the province did move towards what they call welcoming communities policy as opposed to no say whatsoever. But our official plan, do you have any plans to address those issues in this process?
Well, I think we can take a look at the different energy aspects, and then partly what you're speaking of is a compatibility policy for, sensitive land uses next to all kinds of maybe different areas, rail lines, wind turbines, et cetera. So we'll take a look at what can be done from a compatibility perspective that doesn't interfere with compliance with provincial policy.
Okay, so what I'm looking for is some particular address to where the transmission lines are going above ground or below ground. And so that we have that in our official plan when the province starts talking about, or if it starts talking about these kind of projects again.
I'll ask Mr. Mustache to please weigh in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I would suggest is, what you're talking about are really land use impacts related to energy generation facilities. And so where I think we were caught off guard historically is that we didn't have the guidelines to address, location, mitigation, compensation, et cetera. So we can certainly reference the need for that in the new official plan, and then likely we'll develop a set of guidelines to address that future, eventuality should we have more of them. But what I did want to note, Chair, is that when it comes to climate change, and you see the bullet there, energy, it's really about energy consumption. And how can land use patterns have a positive impact on the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions? That's really what we'll be focusing a lot of attention on in terms of building standards, complete community solutions so people don't have to drive to the corner store, looking at active transportation solutions. So that's really what the focus of the energy piece will be as part of the climate change agenda.
Okay, I think I understand that approach. I guess the other item to consider in land use is the big solar farm scenario that has raised land use issues around the region in the past. The second question about the adaptation to climate change has to do with stormwater management and flooding. How is that going to be addressed in this? And when it comes to planning your community, you need to be looking at the 100-year storm or bigger, because 100-year storms are happening every 5 to 10 years now.
Yeah.
So planning around adaptation, to me, I'm more concerned about being flooded than I am about reversing the trend and that's going to be far more impactful immediately, is the severe storms and the floods, and we need to be planning to deal with those.
It's definitely, through the chair to the council, it's definitely a point that we will be discussing. I wouldn't be able to answer that question now, other than there'll have to be discussions on that topic, see what the conservation authority's plans are relative to floodplains given climate change as well. And I think there's going to have to be a lot of discussion about that as part of the exercise.
Sure, and the conservation authorities map the floodplains, but the municipal engineering department designs the drains.
Right.
And the capacities and planning these, talking about permeable paving and ways to absorb rainwater to, slow down the surge that comes from a storm. So that needs to be in our official plan in terms of how we design the densities in the road structure and the drainage structure. The other question I had was about on the urban structure. That slide, I think it's slide 15. I just pleased to say that, or to see that you're considering the region's intent to achieve an eventual 60% intensification rate while protecting established neighborhoods. I know that's been a significant issue where the municipalities trying to achieve intensification by allowing 4 and 5 townhouses on what was a single house lot in an established suburban neighborhood. South End St. Catharines, you might say. So I see that you've noted that, and in your presentation here, I hope I'm interpreting your words properly. You say while protecting established neighborhoods. So is that while protecting the character of the established neighborhood by avoiding shoving in 4 townhouses on a single lot?
Well, through the chair to the councillor, the urban structure is to identify intensification areas where a significant amount of intensification can go to take care of, to take advantage of public infrastructure, transit, community investment, etc. So that, if the intensification happens there, there's less need for it to happen in other areas of established neighborhoods. The other avenue that we've been partnering with municipalities on, and we are the approval authority in some cases, we delegate it, is secondary plans, where a local municipality can then go through a secondary planning exercise to plan strategically where intensification should take place in a community. That's another tool to protect established neighborhoods, because you can strategically put intensification within a community for age in place opportunities, et cetera, and then protect the area.
Thank you. Reno?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to comment, and Mr. Hayworth is bang on in terms of identifying strategic locations, but also a great example is you have to be proactive at the local level. So, for example, the GO secondary plans that we just completed in conjunction with, or in cooperation with the local communities, those are really, that sort of is an ideal template on how to look at a neighborhood and sensitively increase the ability to incorporate intensification while at the same time preserving neighborhood character. That's been a very successful program, and that hopefully becomes the model for us to address this point.
Councillor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I think the West St. Catharines GO Station plan, after a number of consultation and adjustments, I think that satisfies my concern about respecting the character of the neighborhood. And I just wanted to say that I hope this plan will make that very clear, that notion of protecting the character of established neighborhoods. And you've noted here the downtown St. Catharines Urban Growth Center. Because the city's very clear, they want high density at the 2 hospital sites and the General Motors site. So we keep to this strategy. I think it'll fit and work for St. Catharines at least on achieving the density numbers that the province is looking for. And the final comment is on same page. Identify important strategic intensification areas to direct growth, served by a combination of transportation and transit. So my point there is that when we're designing our inter-regional transit routes, that we consider the plan and the route together so that we put the route where we want the growth, not necessarily the fastest route from point A to point B, but a combination of that, travel time plus where we want the development to happen. Because if we're going to establish the route, then the employers will know I can get people there that don't need a car, and that's where I want to build my employment. So I hope that that's the way you're looking at this in terms of the transportation.
Thank you.
And working it with the transportation plan so the two work together.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nunziata.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the presenter. Thanks, Dave, for the presentation. So I always look at this exercise as an opportunity to push Niagara solutions to Niagara problems. But through your own comments, you said that this is a top-down process, that we are trying to craft policy at our level that conforms to the provincial policies. So the question begs, how outside the box are we thinking on this? If we've identified a great opportunity and there's just absolutely nowhere within that provincial policy to implement that vision, how aggressive are we going to be in actually trying to have the province accommodate us or putting in language that could provide that opportunity or that flexibility? Or are we just going to wash our hands and say, unfortunately, there's nothing in the provincial policy that allows us to do this, so we're stuck to the status quo and doing what we've always done?
Commissioner Mustache?
I'll initiate that, and maybe Dave could supplement it. But what you heard Mr. Hayworth reference in the presentation is a regional mandate. And that's a new thing in our official plan, because we've never really enunciated regional mandate before in terms of the planning policy. So that's where I think that's the starting point. That's a point of departure in terms of identifying key opportunities that are important to the region, and it becomes a mandate for us. And we have to get buy-in at an early stage with respect to the mandate. Clear the hurdles at a high level, and then filter down a policy program to implement it. So that's how I envision it. I don't know if, Dave, you have further commentary.
No, I agree with Reno. As you probably heard me mention, we want to only be prescriptive where we have to be, and we want to provide guidance to the local municipalities and let them do their local planning as much as we can. I think partly, to answer your question in fairness, would depend on the issue as well as to how far we can push an envelope.
Through the chair, and I agree 100%, it depends on the issue. But my point being, as we go through this process, this exercise, have we identified these unique situations that are very unique and inherent to Niagara, but not necessarily Burlington or Oshawa or some other part of the province that subscribes to the same provincial policy. So we've identified these unique attributes of Niagara.
Right.
We'd like to build upon those unique attributes, but there's no place within the provincial policy to implement something like that. So the question is, are we going to be aggressive in asking the province to change language and be a little bit more flexible in those policies in order for us to accommodate? Or are we going to say, unfortunately, there's no language within the provincial policy, and this is what you get, Niagara?
Yeah.
Commissioner?
Yeah,
Just a different way of asking the same question,
so,
I guess.
yeah, so if you recall, Chair, we, through the coordinated plan review process, we put forward quite an extensive list of policy adjustments that we were looking for. And frankly, with not a lot of success.
Exactly.
Now, that was not, I can say this, that was not unique to Niagara. It was consistent with how the province dealt with the requests that came from all the municipalities within the growth plan area. And that was simply, I think, a slice in time in terms of how the government of the day chose to react to the requests from the various growth plan municipalities. I'm thinking that as we move forward, we're going to dust off the comments that we had that Regional Council has endorsed and try to get a better audience to advocate for those.
Okay, so to that point, then we are going to be aggressive with our provincial partners in order to help with some of the language changes.
Chair, I would say that, I wouldn't say that we're going to be aggressive, but we're going to be consistent and we're going to bring forward evidence. We're going to bring forward a rational, cogent analysis to convince folks that need to be convinced that we're doing the right thing from a land use perspective, and we are truly interested in great outcomes and good planning for Niagara. So we'll be persistent and consistent with our message.
Okay, well, I appreciate those answers. One last question to Mr. Hayworth. Under urban structure, and it's good that we have the slide up here right now, I just need some definition around identify a hierarchy of settlement areas, assign population and density accordingly. That sounds like a policy that creates winners and losers within an individual municipality, an individual area.
Through the chair to the councillor, we want to assign to those urban structure nodes what would be a density target for them to potentially achieve, to strive towards. The hierarchy of settlement areas is something we're still trying to define with the province as to what that actually would mean. It could mean a settlement area, a rural area, and a hamlet, but that's something we have to define with the province.
And I appreciate those comments because we need to identify, we need to put a definition of that because that reeks of picking winners and losers within an individual community, within an individual region. And I think it benefits certain areas, but it disenfranchises other areas. So I think we need a more robust definition around that one because I don't necessarily want to be picking winners and losers. I want to be able to identify areas that can benefit from the policy exercise that we're going through right now. Those are all my comments, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hayworth.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rigby?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're in a council meeting now, are we not?
Yes.
Yeah, I will ask if people will rise.
Should I be rising?
It is. Thank you very much for reminding me.
If I may, just in the discussion that you had a little earlier, you mentioned the green plan, and there was some question related to it, and that we might in the future be able to have more input into the green plan as it goes, which I thought we've already done the review and we're kind of stuck with what the policy plan is. So it goes back to Councilor Nunziata's question is, how can we still deal with a green plan in some areas that are causing a great deal of problems for individuals who are stuck with their property and can't do anything with it?
Right.
Sorry.
Thank you. Please.
Through the chair to the councillor, we're well aware of all the properties in the Greenbelt plan where there's an issue. As Reno mentioned, there was a provincial plan review. There was a lot of input provided at the regional and local levels as to where the mapping was incorrect, etc. The province didn't make those changes. But we are going to still, there's been an election, there's been a change. We are going to try, and what Reno had talked about was provide evidence-based guidelines or criteria to the province to say, look at these criteria, these make sense. Can you consider those criteria in looking at making some changes? So we'll continue the dialogue. I don't know what the outcomes will be, but we will continue that dialogue.
So in the discussion, you know of individual situations that occur. I know of one in St. Catharines, in fact, the gentleman sitting in the audience, that really needs to be seriously looked at, because next door to it is a very large church with a very large gym, with a lovely picnic area, and a great big parking lot. And it's pretty hard to understand why that can happen and you can't take your what is now a driving range and sell that as a residential. So it's very difficult, and we need to be trying to be proactive. And I got to tell you, in that situation, Mr. Chair, that's been going on since before I was mayor. So we need to try and fix it. And I know there are others with, not necessarily with green plan, might be within their own structures that are sitting here wondering how we go forward. So my next question, if I may, is we're looking at this being a plan that in 2021 will then become effective, or are we going to phase these items in as we go along?
Through the chair to the councillor, once we complete it in 2021, it goes to the province. So hopefully the dialogue with the province will have paved the way for them to provide an efficient time frame for approval. And once they approve the official plan, then it's in force and effect. There is no appeal under Section 26. And then the local municipalities will bring their plans into conformity.
So until then, we'll be going with our present regulations that we are presently working with.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, David, for your report. I'm going to, for the advantage of my colleagues, the whole idea of value-added activities on farms was not one that was even in the minds of the region or in the minds of the province before the region and the town of Lincoln brought it forward. They never approved it for 2 years after the official plan had gone forward. So I think that we should be very bold. I learned this from the commissioner, by the way. You need to be very bold and determine what your local initiatives need to be based on your own terms. And then you need to take them forward, because eventually people will think that they're their ideas. It's the best thing that ever happened to our community, because it allows farmers to be equal, Mr. Chairman, in terms of their own economies. And they are in control of the value chain from beginning to end, and that's exactly what we want. It changes other things in the community, but it brings equity where it needs to be. So my question to you is, sometimes these processes don't net a whole lot of people being involved, and that's just because they seem to be too far removed from the average person to be meaningful. So we have to find a way to engage people so that we can get their interest, because this is very, very, very important. Would you be open to engaging with any willing municipality on a local initiative that would demonstrate the proactive intentions of a new official plan? I'm looking for a way that these changes would be relevant to the average person.
Is the question clear, Mr. Hayworth?
Well, I think I understand the question, Chair. To the councillor, that's partly why we're coming to the local municipalities, our local partners, and coming to the councils to inform them at various stages of what we're doing. And if you remember the slide for the background studies where, you know, we compile the background, we get input, we'll be getting input from the various stakeholders groups, the agricultural associations, et cetera. And we'll be talking to the local councils at that point, option stage and recommendations. And we're doing a lot of work as well. We have technical advisory committees with area planners that will sit on those committees, and they're very knowledgeable of the agricultural issues and what's happening in their local municipalities as well. So that's somewhat of the framework we're.
If I could just ask Mr. Giles to add a comment.
Yes, and thank you to supplement that through the chair. We have also created the Planning Advisory Committee, which is representative of 8 residents from across the region. And on that, there are actually 2 people from the agricultural community who sit on that. And the whole purpose of that committee, when we established it, was to have public input on all of the policies that we're going to be bringing forward and sort of get their expertise and their involvement and their thinking into these processes and policies too. So that's one way that we're also going to be involving public.
And Mr. Chairman, I appreciate all of this. But the fact is that when you get reports as a council from planners, they are usually a recital of policy. And those recitals are great if you know the subject matter. I'm trying to search out whether there's going to be a mechanism for the public to be involved, not just to hear people speak, but to actually be engaged in having a toing and froing of ideas and use the central subject of some initiative that exists in their own communities, because we're not always talking about agriculture. There are issues on main streets all over in terms of the development of main streets.
Right.
There are issues, as Councillor Timms mentioned, just in terms of the congestion in existing areas of our communities. If we can't start having these very, very face-to-face discussions with people on how these things are going to look, what those words are going to look like, then we have nothing but pages of a recital of planning policy. And that's great when you have to make a decision. But I'm talking about a process that is absolutely out of the box. We will never get to the kind of out-of-the-box thinking that Councillor Nunziata is talking about, the kind of project that Councillor Mayor Joyner is talking about, unless we begin to change the mechanism by which we have those conversations. And I would bet that on average, if there are 100 people in any large community that are engaged in the official planning adjustment processes, that we would be lucky. If we go into the next 10 years with that as our baseline, we're going to be in very, very bad shape, and we're going to have a lot of unhappy people. So I encourage, Mr. Chairman, that we look at a different way of doing this. Creating more committees is not going to do it. We have to have the painful process of coming together face to face at the community level so that people can ask those hard questions. If those questions are too hard for us to ask, then I think we're failing our communities. And I just use Prudhome's as an example. We never ever had more than 12, maybe 14 issues. Commissioner Mustachi can correct me. But we had 100 and 120 people for 2 years attached to that project. We were literally attached at the hip. And we were challenged every time we turned around. If we said A, and 2 months later, we changed that a bit and said C, those people were right on top of us. And that is the kind of exchange that you want. Otherwise, this is just a document with a whole bunch of words on it. And I know it's going to take longer, but I think the investment is worth it. Thank you.
Mr. Giles?
Yes, through the chair, just to supplement that, I think those comments are very valid. We agree. I think there's been a lot of discussion on how we can engage more people in the community, because let's face it, you know, a lot of people don't like to come out and talk about a document like this, most people wouldn't even read it unless they had to. I think what will do the best approach for this is to take your comments on and have a very good discussion, very robust discussion with area planners and work with them to figure out the best way to engage people, because it would likely need their involvement too. So we'll put that on the agenda of the next area planners meeting and start discussing this. So thank you for your comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and now I'll know where to direct my pressure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Augustine?
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Just to build on what Councillor Easton just said, I was worried when we scheduled this meeting during a short week on a hot day, and here we are. But we're going to hear from the public real soon, so I'll try and be very quick. When I speak to businesses, Mr. Chair, they talk about looking for a streamlined process. They talk about looking for consistency. They talk about looking for certainty. When I talk to the public, they talk about wanting to make sure that we have understandable and accessible plans. Again, to build on what Councillor Easton said. How's this plan going to address both of those in terms of streamlined processes and also understandable and accessible?
Mr. Hayworth?
Through the chair to the councillor, part of what we want to do is have policy that provides overall direction, but refers to other specific studies or plans that have been done that provide the detailed information. So the policy provides an overall direction, and then there's, let's say a transportation master plan or another study that provides very detailed information on approach, etc., that they can refer to. And what we want to do from a policy perspective is try and provide consistency. The other thing we want to do is provide a document, and I think we mentioned this earlier on when we were starting this exercise, that is less detailed, less cumbersome to get through, is more understandable. Example would be pictures, comment boxes next to a policy that provides some context and helps you understand the policy.
Mr. Giles?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And just to supplement that, I think this highlights one of the challenges of the current official plan. And as discussed at the beginning, because amendments have been made to the sections, over time the continuity and the connections between each section has been lost. There are some sections in the current official plan that don't provide much guidance at all, and some sections that are very detailed. And I think this is an excellent chance to actually comprehensively review the official plan and make sure it is more consistent. We want to introduce a lot more user-friendly language into it, and we want to eliminate the current challenges that we have with interpreting some of the sections of the official plan.
Okay. I'm pleased with most of that. I am worried that if you get into kind of detailed documents, that sort of bogs things down, pointing to detailed documents. So I'm sure staff will look at that. Councillor Timms, I think, makes a good point when it comes to transportation, and you think about Niagara and how our community is formed historically. The canal, rail, roads, transit. I just hope that, and I made the point before, that because of our transportation master plan not even talking about transit, I hope that would be included in the official plan. I had a question about the expanding of the urban areas. So what I'm understanding is that urban areas can be expanded, but only if there's a de-designation. And I did ask the question when you came to Pelham Council about that. Well, what happens with de-designation? Does somebody get compensated for that? Do they just get sorry, so sad? And how do we avoid the situation like we had with a local municipal plan where there was and I know Councillor Marshall knows this one, where there was an expansion and then the de-designation was held off, and now they're kind of still discussing that. So how are we going to address that?
Mr. Hayworth?
Through the chair to the councillor, one thing we have to do is complete the urban land needs assessment, because that's going to tell us, are we in a shortage of land, which basically that won't be the case. Do we have sufficient lands or do we have excess greenfield lands? And that gives us a bearing as to where we stand. The provincial policy allows for a rationalization of boundaries. And why we waited for guidance on the land needs assessment, it didn't provide a lot of guidance on de-designation and how you do that. So one thing we have started to initiate right now with area planners is establishing some criteria to assess the expansions under. You know, there could be a municipality that does not have sufficient lands, but is in a growth area, in a marketable area. For them to grow, and maybe they should, there would have to be de-designation somewhere else in the region. There could be a municipality that has excess lands, but they may not all be in the right place. And they may want an expansion. In that case, there might be an opportunity for them to de-designate within their own municipality. It's not easy. And the local municipalities are going to have to be on board, and it's going to also have to be supported by a lot of background studies. It's an avenue that the province has provided. It doesn't mean it has to be an avenue that will be pursued, but it's an avenue that's allowed by policy.
Okay.
Thank you. I
think
just
that'll
remind
be-
that we do have people from the public that are scheduled to speak, and we do have a hard stop because of council meeting tonight, so if we could be quick with the
Okay,
questions.
maybe that, thank you.
Thank you.
Questions have been short, the answers in detail, and I appreciate that. So quickly, the downtown Niagara Falls, downtown Welland emerging urban centers, why only those two? Why not Fort Erie, which is the fourth largest urban municipality in Niagara? And why not other downtowns? But why those two? I mean, obviously they're needed, but why not Fort Erie?
Well, this is preliminary, so we're just putting this out for discussion with area planners at this stage, so that should be noted.
Okay.
For Fort Erie itself, there's an opportunity to look at the local centers, local corridors, possibly regional corridors as well, in terms of defining those. But Niagara Falls, because of the secondary plan kind of overlaps, and it's a larger municipality where, you know, there will be more growth per se, population-wise, unit-wise, and Welland, a larger municipality, the downtown close to the canal, et cetera, there's an opportunity for intensification in those areas.
Commissioner?
Yeah, if I could add. So one of the ways that we've been identifying growth areas, it's really a derivative process. So, for example, the town of Fort Erie has had a long-standing secondary plan, neighborhood planning program. So they basically essentially planned out their entire urban area. And so we are responding to that local solution, as opposed to coming in and saying, oh, you now have to redo all your plans and jack up density. That's not something that we're going to be doing in local communities.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Just the question finally, Mr. Chair, is what if the province changes the rules? I think there's a pretty good chance that the province is going to change the rules. So what I understood the answer was, well, we have to, now that we've started, we have to designate or design this plan under existing rules. Is that what was said, and is that wise?
Do you understand the question, Mr. Hayward?
I do.
Maybe I can respond to that, Chair. So our approach has always been to do what's right for Niagara in terms of good planning practices. So we're identifying growth areas, not because we're told to by the province, but because it makes sense in terms of our growth agenda, our servicing strategies, our transportation and mobility framework. So that's why we're doing what we're doing, not necessarily because we're being told what to do. We're preserving our agricultural land and our natural heritage areas because those are important to the region, and people here respect that and value those areas. That's why we're doing it, not because we're being told to by some ethereal party. And that's the general principle that we'll be bringing forward with everything that we do with respect to the OP.
Councillor?
Thank you. I understood Mr. Hayward saying earlier that this will be under this planning regime. and if the province comes and changes, it will still be under this regime. Can we just get clarity on that very quickly, Mr. Chair? And I'll sit down, thanks.
Mr. Hayward?
Through the chair to the councillor, what I was basically saying is we have to proceed planning in accordance with the approved policies at the time. So if there was changes and there was changes to the planning documents, then we could look at maybe alternative avenues under those planning documents.
Thank you. Councillor Redicott?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, but just on that final note, we wouldn't have any choice, would we? If the provincial government changed the policies, we would have to comply with those.
Right, and depending, through the chair to the councillor, depending on what the changes are and in what manner they're made.
Right. Mr. Chair, if I might, in the context of the municipalities having to change their official plans to comply with the regional official plan once it's established, under moving forward, you've got invite involvement of the local municipalities. Exactly what does that mean?
Through the chair to the councillor, that with the local municipalities, we're inviting involvement through area planners. We're coming to the local councils to update them and provide the information and the different stages we're at. With the background studies that are being undertaken, there'll be different outreach to stakeholders that will be in different municipalities, like natural heritage. There'll be various stakeholders in different municipalities throughout the region that will be involved from that perspective as well.
And finally, Mr. Chair, has there been any consideration given to the possibility of getting the municipality engaged in helping to promote what's going on at the regional plan through our social media, through our websites, and actually holding public meetings in each and every municipality? Because that's where I think you're going to get more involvement in terms of the public speaking to what the plan will be overall, which is going to affect, by definition, each and every municipality and each property owner within the municipality. Is that something that's been considered? And if not, I would suggest that it should be.
Through the chair to the councillor, we can definitely consider that. I'll discuss the social media aspect with communications. We have been discussing when we are at the open house stages, et cetera, to have one in the west side, one for central and one for southern municipalities, but we can look into how many other open houses we can to have to engage the different areas of the region. We just have to consider resources at the time, etc.
Mr. Chair, this is such an important exercise. This will be such an important document that I can't help but think that we should be taking the time to go to every municipality and give people the opportunity to weigh in.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Councillor D'Angelo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Edicop's going to make my questions very easy because that's where I was going also. I wanted to make sure that, because it says local councils to highlight approach and invite involvement when you're moving forward. So what you really, to me, a little bit more is invite involvement. If you're presenting to a local council, that doesn't really invite involvement. You're just telling them what you're doing. So I like the approach that Councillor Edicop said, is that each municipality has an open house throughout this process. And if that's possible, through you, Mr. Chair, to the presenter, what are we looking at in timelines? I know you're trying to complete this by 2021. When would you be looking at going to the local municipalities? And if so, to each one, where would you schedule that in the timeline?
Mr. Hayward?
Through the chair to the councillor, as you recall, we had the one slide for the background studies where we had gather background, get input, options, get input, recommendations, get input. So we would be having open houses and outreach at those stages generally as well. Going to each municipality, we would have to try and fit that in. It may be something where staff may have to attend, and if the consultant, if we have a consultant working on that particular one, they may not be able to attend all of those open houses, but staff may. So we would have to look at it and see where we can fit it in.
Okay.
We would have to fit it in and keep our timelines.
Councillor, or Mr. Giles?
Yeah, thank you. And just to add to that, I think one of the approaches through the chair that we would do with that is, again, take that back to the area planners. One of the things that we've been discussing with the area planners, they're all offered the opportunity to be involved in the technical advisory committees for each background study. And what we've been discussing, we'll discuss them, what the main area of interest would be for each of the municipalities, and then look at the background reports and how we're sequencing everything and figure out when the best time would be to go to each municipality. And if they wanted specific topics presented, or if they would want sort of a broad brush of all of the topics to present at public open houses. So we'll take that back to area planners.
Okay, through Mr. Chair, I think that's an excellent idea, working with the area planners, but they have to get to the local councils too, because you want to make sure they're on side with this and not just getting a report every once in a while. I think if you invite their involvement, I think you have to educate them and bring them up to speed and have those open houses, which are very critical. Working with staff and also working with the local area municipalities planning staff. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no more speakers, I have a question. Will you be looking at irrigation systems in Niagara?
To the chair, one thing we have to do is look at, to an extent, what are considered to be water courses and policies surrounding those. So part of that exercise will be what's a water course and potentially what's an irrigation system.
Thank you. Seeing no more speakers, I'm going to call for a mover and seconder to get this, the motion on the floor. Is there a mover and seconder? Councillor DeAngelis, Councillor Volpatti. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Do you have a question? Please, please go ahead.
I think I'd like to amend this because I don't think the Planning Act necessarily provides that there be outreach to the area municipalities, and I think we need that in here. So I'd like to amend this to include vigorous involvement of the local municipalities in the process.
Okay. Do you want to word that specifically for this motion, and then I'll ask for a seconder?
Yeah. So it would say with the requirements of the Planning Act, but also involving the local area municipalities, including open houses in each one. I need a second.
I'm just, excuse me, I'm just getting some information for the process. Okay.
Why?
So, to the clerks, have you captured the essence of the amendment? Please do, Commissioner.
If I may, Chair, I'd like to make a suggestion. I respect Councillor Redekop's input. Maybe instead of sort of isolating it to specifically that point, can we say pursuant to the requirements of the Planning Act and the direction of Regional Council, so that way it's a bit broader, because as we move forward, Regional Council may provide additional direction in addition to consultation at each municipality.
Councillor?
That's fine, Mr. Chair. I don't want that to be lost. I think it could be expanded for sure, but I think it sounds like a number of councillors are concerned about the amount of input that will be obtained from the public and from the local area municipalities. So that's fine. I'm content to make that my amendment.
Get it on the screen.
Okay.
Let me know if this captures the essence of what you're looking for.
While we're doing that, Chair, on a point of order, if I might.
Sure.
Ordinarily, we would listen, at the local level, we would listen to the delegates before we would deal with the motion. So I'm wondering whether this shouldn't be held over until we hear from the public.
Thank you. I got information from the clerk regarding that. So, Madam Clerk, would you like to speak to that before we speak to the amendment?
Through you, Chair. At this point, the motion is to authorize council to go ahead and start working on the plan. What should come before the if council's not going to authorize working on the plan, why would we have the public provide input?
Because the Planning Act provides it.
So by allowing us to go ahead and saying staff's authorized to work on the plan, then we'll have the public speak, and then their comments will be referred to consideration of the official plan.
Well, from a notional and a perceptual perspective, the public is here because this is a public meeting, presumably under the Planning Act.
Right.
Correct.
And if we make a decision before we hear from the public, their presence here seems somewhat unnecessary. There may very well be something that arises from the public's comments that might make us consider a further amendment or some other change. So this is the beginning of the process. That's how I view it. I could be wrong, but I think that we should be hearing from the public before we pass the resolution.
Fair enough. I'll hold the vote on this. Let's vote on the amendment to see what, to see if council has an appetite to approve the amendment that's before us. Did you have a seconder for the amendment? Councillor Joyner? Is this the amendment that you intended to propose?
That's fine, Chair, yes.
Thank you. So just on the amendment alone, and we'll hold the vote on the motion itself. So on the amendment, all those in favor? Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies. There is a speaker's list to the amendment. Councillor D'Angelo?
Well, you captured my point also. I think the speaker should speak before we fully vote on the motion that's put us onto the floor. Even the amendment should wait till after we hear the speakers that are scheduled to speak. To me, that's more of a better process than voting on this, even the amendment at this point in time, because then we may end up changing the amendment because of something that one of the speakers said. I think we should hold off until we hear the speakers. That's my point.
We can further amend this. The public should know what they're going to be speaking about. So this kind of gives them the information that they need to craft their notes.
Well, Mr. Chair, the original motion was sufficient enough for the public to speak on. Adding an amendment. So if we add a second amendment, will we give these speakers an opportunity to come back and speak again on the second amendment that's coming forward?
I guess we can do that.
Okay, as long as we do that, I'm fine with it.
Councillor Annunziata?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support more public consultation, but I just don't want to marginalize the efforts of Mr. Hayworth. He made this presentation to Fort Erie Council, and he started off with a preamble talking about the public consultation that's going above and beyond the statutory notices and statutory requirements. So I just wanted to give that piece of it out there. Maybe Mr. Hayworth can kind of comment on that, because I recall you started the presentation with that exact same preamble.
Again, you're going to have to be concise with your responses. We're getting late in the hour.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor, that's correct. I mean, we're having a special council meeting this evening. The other requirements are a formal public meeting at the point in time of when the official plan would be compiled. We're having outreach and consultation at 3 different phases of the background studies, and then each policy section, not a formal public meeting, but public meetings at that stage and open houses for the various policy sections, and then the formal public meeting under the Act. So we're going well beyond, and I do appreciate the comments this evening as well.
I just wanted to recognize that. Thank you, Mr. Hayworth.
Thank you. Councillor Volpatti?
Chair, I'm willing to stand down if we're going to be voting on this later. I have some comments on the amendment, but I can do it later.
I think I'm hearing an appetite that council wants to hold on the amendment as well.
Yes.
And so why don't we move on to the public portion of the meeting and hear from the public. So thank you, Mr. Hayworth, for your presentation tonight.
Thank you.
As the chair of this meeting, I wish to remind all present that our discussions, presentations, and questions must be conducted through the chair and done so in a respectful manner, and I'm sure you will. I thank you in advance for your cooperation, and at this time, members of the public are reminded to give their name for the record when they rise to speak and are granted 10 minutes to speak. With that, I'm going to ask for our first speaker to come to the podium, Mrs. Gloria Ketch and Andy Narrow. Would you please come to the podium? Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. regional councilors, regional staff, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Andy Nero, and I am here with my neighbor, Gloria Ketch. And the reason we're here is because of the official plan. We just want them to keep into consideration certain situations. We reside in Pelham, and we are on the east side of the urban boundary. So we are on the east side of Rice Road. We are neither in the Greenbelt and we're neither in the urban boundary. We are 5 properties that are basically a white spot on most of the regional maps. And we just want to understand, we realize that the region has gone to great means of costs for infrastructure, and we are not understanding why these 5 properties, which are labeled good fruit agricultural, but if you were to drive by or see, just like Councillor Rigby had said, it's just not the case. They're not farmable properties. They're very small properties, and they're not viable farms. We just want, during the official planning stage, to recognize there are certain areas in municipalities that have to be looked at, not as growth areas, but as areas that were missed out. At several public meetings we went to, and speaking to the regional planners, they called our little white spot on the map an urban area error. They said it should have been included in the urban boundary. It's not in the Greenbelt. We're very close to Merritt Road, which I'm sure they're going to open up to connect to someday with the 406. So maybe that's a reason we weren't placed in the Greenbelt. Maybe that's a reason we should have been considered for the urban plan. Now, what I'd like to say also is north of us is the Greenbelt, but there's a very small strip of Greenbelt. And I'd like to speak for those residents too. There's 25 residences there. There's 4 businesses there. There's a church there. It's a 200-meter wide strip of Greenbelt that really isn't Greenbelt. And for years, there's people on those properties that have paid taxes for many years that don't farm their properties. And they're not viable farms because of their sizes, yet they're handcuffed. And we just want you to just like the counselor, the good counselor said, just maybe talk to the residences, get their opinion, and say, look, we have to go outside of the box, just like Councillor Anuncia said. We've gone to the region several times. The municipality has kindly supported us and understand what we're going through, but when we go to the region, all they say is it's against policy, and that's their answer. You have to look beyond policy. They say, oh, because you're out of the urban boundary, you have no rights. Well, the policy says if you're out of the urban boundary, you shouldn't have services. Well, we have water services. So they've gone against policies in some areas, and then they haven't in others. And we just want you to be consistent and listen to some of these specific areas that need looked at. And we've been fighting this battle for many, many years, 15, 20 years, and we've gone nowhere. This is our opportunity now again, and we really want you to take a look at it. And I don't know, Gloria, if you want to say anything.
Not unless there's any questions.
Thank you for your presentation. We will be open the speakers list for questions. I just want to remind before we start in the questions that if we do run out of time tonight, that we're going to have to schedule a second part to this public meeting because we do need to move on with tonight's council meeting. It starts at 6:30. Councillor Nunziata.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through to the delegates. Thank you, and I agree. It's frustrating because how many times have you come to any level of government to try to have your concerns heard?
I had the MPP of the province, Hudak at the time, drive down the road, and I said to him, which side actually looks urban to you, the right side or the left side? And he drove and he said, well, obviously the left side. We have all those houses, businesses, a church, and they've not included us in the urban boundary. They've not allowed us to tie into this beautiful infrastructure of sewer system that they've decided to build there, right down the middle of the road, and not allow us that. Now, I understand the Greenbelt area, but our 5 little residences, our little white spot, our little hole, donut hole, or a little island there, we should have been included. And I know there's a cost to that. But even allowing us to be what we are, not rural, good fruit agricultural, but we are rural, we're residential. All I want to do is keep my family home and be able to build a home for my child next to me. That's all we're asking. We're not asking to develop. We're not asking to tie in sewers, but we just want to be considered what we are, labeled what we are.
All great comments, and I'm hoping that staff captures those comments and makes those part of the public record. So thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Volpatti?
Thank you, Chair, and I certainly appreciate your situation. And I would just move to refer this to staff for comment, to address these comments, and that they should form part of the new official plan process.
Thank you. Councillor, I think that's part of the process, that will happen naturally. That all the comments are going to be referred to staff.
Just as long as they do get there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Augustine?
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Just want to underscore the fact that the Town of Pelham Council is supportive of this. There's some correspondence that was sent to the region in 2016, and I think they've been waiting for their opportunity to do this, and Regional Council started this process in November 2016. So, you know, Town of Pelham Council is supportive, and this is an area that the Council of the Day many years ago, back in 2000, wanted it included, or in the mid-90s, wanted it included in the urban area. So anyways, if we can include it, as Councillor Volpatti said, it should be dealt with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and seeing no more questions, I'll call the next speaker to the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
At this time, I'll call Dr. John Bacher to the podium, please. And even though I've said your name, could you please repeat your name again and the community that you reside?
Thank you. I'm Dr. John Bacher. I live 134 Church Street in St. Catharines.
Thank you. Please continue.
As a lifelong resident of St. Catharines, I have lived through new official plan reviews and a comprehensive zoning bylaw review. And I saw it being sold as a great improvement over what existed before. The same things I'm hearing now, that more understandable, more streamlined. And at the end of the day, I think what was produced was inferior documents to the existing official plan and existing morass of zoning bylaws. And I have similar trepidation with this process. One thing I would agree with one of the discussion documents about how agriculture and environmental policies are closely intertwined. I am happy about the call for more watershed planning. And this is one of the reasons there shouldn't be any more urban boundary expansions. One thing I don't think Mr. Hayward's error was intentional, but these urban boundary expansions are not supposed to be considered according to the growth plan on a municipality by municipality basis. Growth plan says very clearly should be on the needs of the entire upper tier municipality. But these urban boundary expansions have a tremendous negative effect on water quality. This was shown by Jean Grandoni when there was a water shed, the 10 Mile Creek, that was affected by an urban boundary expansion. The expansion was denied by the Ontario Municipal Board, and one of the major reasons was that she measured E. coli counts in the 10 Mile Creek and the Shriners Creek. 10 Mile Creek is non-urbanized watershed. Shriners Creek, entirely urbanized watershed. The E. coli counts in the Shriners Creek were like world records. 10 Mile Creek was remarkably pristine. Now, this concept of de-designation, that province did not put this in. As a result of my efforts, I tried to persuade them against this. I thought it was a dangerous ground, but if this de-designation is done, it should be only on lands that have a significant environmental constraint. Regional plan has environmental protection areas, environmental conservation areas. This should not be used for open land without trees. Now, I'm concerned about the stakeholder consultation to date. Regarding agriculture, the region has an agriculture policy and action committee. Before I prepared my brief, I went to the region's website, noticed they had a meeting in April. This matter was not discussed. I think it would have been appropriate to deal with the official plan there. It's a committee that keeps formal minutes accessible on the website. Whatever consultation was done with agriculture, I think was not done in a transparent manner. I also think we have 3 years to do this, that the region should reconstitute the Environmental Advisory Committee, EAC. I believe the reason that it was disbanded, it hadn't met in a number of years, but occasion like this, developing a new official plan, certainly could have been reactivated and served for the 3 years to provide advice. What I'm concerned of, this term environmental stakeholder, I have a suspicion that it means people who do consulting work for development companies. I was at a meeting that after the completion of the last review of environmental policies, and there were 100 people in the room, and 90 of them were consultants for developers. It's astonishing that there would be such a large industry in environmental consulting. And I don't believe that this is the way environmental consultations should take place. Regarding agricultural policy, this matter of de-designation, it mentions agricultural assessments. Now, if agricultural assessments are done, they would show that the area that is not valuable for agriculture is within the urban boundaries. These assessments look at things like capitalization, if there's any farm buildings, these areas, absence of farm buildings, just cash cropping, that tends to be farming within the urban boundary. When we were working on the 10 Mile Creek watershed hearing, Jean and I went around and we saw a former dairy farm within the urban boundary. Since we did that, that dairy farm is no longer operating, and there seems to be virtually no active farms within the urban boundary of Niagara Falls. Now, my comments about process being driven by environmental consultants for developers certainly brought to mind when Mr. Hayworth said that woodland was one of the areas that his environmental stakeholders were concerned about. These woodlands are protected through designations called environmental conservation areas. They were developed carefully through a 2-year process between 2005 and 2006. Now, environmental consultants are using the problem of ash die-off to challenge some of the ECA designations. This is an issue where one of these consultants, Savanta, has raised this in the city of Niagara Falls in regards to the Thundering Waters development. Now, on this very topic, it was quite concerned to me that the city of Niagara Falls had a critique of what Savanta said in the December 11th, 2017 letter. Yes.
Consolidate your comments to the document that's you circulated to us.
Yes, and this is what I'm
drifting into
referring
a separate
to,
topic.
and I will read exactly from it.
You have about 1 minute, sir. Thank you.
They say that M&R disputes the view that as a result of ash die-off, the dominant canopy species will change the functional value of the woodlands. Woodlands are contiguous with existing forested wetland and upland areas which contribute to the overall species and structural diversity. Size of larger woodland areas and functional linkages between present features. So I plead to you that this exercise not be a mechanism to reduce the size of environmental conservation areas, to open up development based on what I believe is junk science from self-interested parties to foster inappropriate development. And that's my presentation.
Councillors, questions, please. The floor is open for questions.
Okay.
Councillor Volpatti.
Through your chair, acting chair, they'll all be referred to staff.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
That is the process. Is there anyone for the speakers list? I have Councillor Augustine.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. Sorry, Dr. Bacher. Madam Chair, Dr. Bacher mentioned the de-designation. He gave some feedback to the province. I wondered if he might circulate that to us.
Yes, please do.
Yes, it'd be a bit of a challenge, but look, the province didn't accept my views. The growth plan permits de-designation, but I'll try to go through my computer. I've had some computer thefts that were rather mysterious, so I may have difficulty finding them. If you are interested, they're all a matter of a public record and comments on the growth plan. I'm sure the province would be happy to provide them to me.
Thank you. Anyone else? I don't see anyone else on the list. Thank you very much, Dr. Bacher.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, is there anyone else in attendance that wishes to speak on this matter? Madam, please come forward. I'd like to remind you to provide council with your name and address, please.
Yes. I've been coming here for a long time. Sometimes I wished I had a chair. My name is Jean Grandoni, Rural Route number 1, Garner Road, Niagara Falls. And I believe you all have a copy of my letter, and which I would like to mainly read from. I'm okay, I think. Okay. Yes.
Thank you.
To quote the newspaper notice, when the regional official plan was originally approved in the mid-1970s, the role of the region and the intent of the plan primarily focused on protecting agricultural lands and establishing urban or settlement areas boundaries. This primary focus to protect agricultural lands must be maintained in your new regional official plan, and in addition must be extended to include fishing, which includes water, mining, and forestry, giving us the big four primary resources or industries of farming, fishing, mining, and forestry. These are the economic foundation for all nations, not just housing. Therefore, as has been requested for decades, I propose the following improvements to the region's plan. The first is to amend the agricultural land-based map for the lands between Niagara Falls and Thorold and between the Welland River and the Niagara Escarpment from the good general designation to good grape and good fruit, as proven in the 8-week-long OMB hearing on the urban boundaries for Niagara Falls and Thorold. That OMB decision is dated February the 9th, 1979, with page 10 providing the OMB conclusion on capability for fruit and grapes. My eldest brother was one of the witnesses there, as well as farmer Russell Youngblood. Some 600 acres of Labrusca and French hybrids were grown throughout the area, and most farms had a family orchard. A fruit orchard existed on Uppers Lane, and the area won 2 Grape King awards, namely Mr. Lemick and Mr. Davis. Vinifera grapes are now being grown here, and a new winery has started on Highway 20. The Cataract Winery on Beaver Dams Road, and I have a picture of it. The old building was torn down by a land speculator, was established back in the 1930s, but the farmer owner died at an early age, and the winery ceased with his passing. And my dad, back in the 1930s, had penny shares in that winery. Second point is illegal dumping. I suggest a policy to stop illegal dumping on prime farmlands and in floodplains, creeks and creek valleys, drainage ditches, etc. This has been out of control for decades, and I believe it is polluting groundwater. There is next to no enforcement even of any existing legislation. The floodplain of the Welland River is even being dumped on at the Town Line Road and the Creek Road in Thorold, and also at the Moyer Road and the Creek Road. And there's major development proposals going on this river without the benefits of a watershed plan. And in this day and age, and Councillor Timms was talking about the recurrence of 100-year storms becoming more frequent. And look what's going on. Is it any wonder? Third point, climate change. Dumping brings us to this topic, the Beaver Dams Creek. And I will add here that at one point, and I'm not sure if it still is, to be fair, the Beaver Dams Creek was it feeds into Lake Gibson, and Lake Gibson at one time, and I'm not sure if it still is, was the emergency drinking water supply for the city of St. Catharines. What are you drinking? Climate change. Dumping brings us to this topic. The Beaver Dams Creek dumping has been going on for decades, especially in its valleys. This impacts the sensitive microclimate in this area of Niagara Falls for fruit and grape growing as air drainage patterns are changed. Garbage dumps must also stop. Building mountains also changes air drainage patterns. Climate change is further impacted by the clear cutting of our forests, both dryland and wetland types. Stronger forestry protection must be designated in watershed plans of Point 4. And point 4 is watershed planning. I support the region in making this an enforceable part of the region's plan. Such a policy must require such plans cover the watershed both inside and outside the urban boundaries so that both points 2 and 3 would be effective and more enforceable. The lack of watershed planning has resulted in destruction of fisheries, especially on the 3 inland streams of the 10-mile Shriners and Beaver Dams Creek between Niagara Falls and Thorold. And the old timers that knew these streams have all passed on. I can only repeat what they told me. I do remember eating pike out of the Beaver Dams Creek, and then I never ate it again because everything started to get polluted. They're all full of sewage right now. No diversions should occur. Any diversions impact 2 or more watersheds as they dry up one stream and overload the other, cause massive destruction to trees adjacent to streams, and cause loss of cropland to farmers. Fisheries are the forgotten local food supply. Remember that fish are found locally, not just in the North Cottage country. And it's interesting that in our education system, they teach us world geography, but very little local. I think they don't want us to know what we're losing. However, due to lack of watershed plans, illegal dumping, filling of floodplains by developers, and diversions, much of this local food supply has been lost. And that local food supply was free food for these people on welfare or unemployed. We once had pike up to 3 feet long, but with developer encroachment, pike are almost extinct in the inland waters mentioned above. And further, they're all polluted. There needs to be something in the regional policy plan to enforce cleanup of all these regional overflows. The last report, there may be a few less now, but one of the regional reports said there was 285 overflows across the region, and that's got to be curtailed. And there should be policies pointing to the stopping of the continued use of overflows. That concludes my presentation.
Mayor Joyner, Councillor Joyner, on the speaker's list.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be very quick. Mrs. Grandoni, thank you so much for your presentation. I want to go to bullet number 2 when you talk about illegal dumping. Are you talking about site alteration, illegal dumping, where massive amounts of dump trucks are coming in and dumping hundreds of thousands of loads of dirt on prime agricultural land? Is that what you're referring to?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you're not referring to illegal dumping on the side of a valley or a crescent
Well, I don't
close to
believe
a
in
river?
that. I don't believe in filling in our valleys, even if you do declare it legal.
Okay, okay. But mainly here in bullet number 2, you're talking about, through you, Madam Chair, site alteration bylaw. Is that correct?
Well, it's sure not enforced if they have one. Okay. I mean, it's what's going on in the falls is the equivalent of an urban boundary expansion. There's so much of it.
Have you been to West Lincoln, man?
Not too often.
It's terrible.
Thing.
Anyway, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. There's no one else on the speaker's list. Thank you again, Ms. Grandoni.
Because it's there too is no excuse for it to continue.
I agree, 100%. Thank you.
Thank you. I was just going to ask. I didn't see anybody when she put her hand up. She was the only one.
Thank you. So I'll ask again, are there any more speakers? Seeing none, we do have the motion, the amendment first, and then the motion to consider. Okay. Is there a... Can we have a mover and seconder to receive and refer to staff all the comments that are on the screen? Councillor Timms, Councillor Jeffs, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. We can go back to the original motion when it's amended. Are there any further questions to the amendment? We'll deal with the amendment first. Councillor Valpatti.
Yes, Chair, my concern is that we're not going to restrict staff from using other methods of involving the municipalities.
Exactly.
But this is the only one specified, and that's why
Oh, I see.
I'm concerned. I understand this will include public open houses in each municipality, but we're definitely not going to restrict consultation to that.
I wouldn't expect so. I think it.
I just want to make that clear.
Okay, thank you very much. Seeing no more speakers to the amendment, I'll call the vote on the amendment. All in favor? Opposed, if any? And that carries. Now to the amended motion. I'll call the vote on the amended motion. All those in favor? Recorded has been requested. Please use the buttons.
The vote is open.
Have we received it?
Yes.
We've done that.
And that carries. Thank you very much. I'm sorry? The 2 no votes did not sign out. Could you please have that record corrected? Thank you very much. Given the hour, I'm going to suggest that this concludes the public meeting respecting the 5-year review of the regional policy plan. Should any individual wish to be informed of when the region is considering the final report on this matter, they must inform the regional clerk in writing. So with that, we have a bylaw, and I'll ask for a mover and seconder for the bylaw, Councillor Grenier, Councillor Volpatti. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that carries. With that, I'll call this meeting adjourned. We do have a council meeting that starts at 6:30. Given that we're going to need a break between meetings, I'm going to ask for a recess of 15 minutes. Is that fair?
Yep. Thank you.
Okay.